Ready? Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark DiCarlo. Tonight my guest is Mr. John Kelly. So, Mr. Kelly, political analyst, right?
Well,
political consultant?
Doing political consulting these
What's
days.
the name of your company?
Herodias, the campaign machine.
So who are you political consultant for right now?
Right now I have 4 candidates, Mark, I'm working with. I'm working with Judge David Stith in County Court of Law 3. I think he's a great candidate. I'm also working with David Torres, who's running on Precinct 1 for County Commission against Mike Pusley. He's a Democrat, former CCPD captain, great contestant. Chad McGill, who's ran for District 2 in the City Council races. Another really good young candidate, and Marcus Sorensen, who's a brand new guy to politics. He's got a great future. He owns his own physical therapy company, has 2 kids in CCISD school district, is going to run at large based on an ethics platform. So
I don't know if I should bring gossip into this, but I saw on this Democratic site that a lot of people were giving you a hard time for working for Judge David Stith, because Judge David Stith, who was appointed by, I guess it was the county commissioners, to replace the ex-judge, I think that was John Martinez.
Yes.
And David Stith is a Republican, and that you, in fact, were a turncoat because...
Right, yeah.
How do you answer that?
I think it's pretty interesting because I think the people who make those kind of statements don't really understand judicial politics in Nueces County. Because the bottom line in Nueces County is, first of all, let's talk about judicial elections. Judicial elections should be nonpartisan. A judge who runs and is elected can't act in a partisan way by the Judicial Code of Ethics. He really can't do much to support the party once he's elected. So really it's a nonpartisan position. A lot of people have been saying it should be a nonpartisan position for a long time. Then on top of that you have the reality of Nueces County, which is that Hispanic voters vote for Hispanic names, white voters vote for white names. So if you want to be a judge in Nueces County and you are a Republican and you're Hispanic, you're not going to run in a Republican primary because you'll get beat. You're going to run in the Democratic primary so you can get on the general ticket. The same is true for white Democrats. If they're smart, they're going to run on the Republican ticket because that's the only way they're going to get to the general election. That's a reality of voting in Nueces County. I think most judges realize that, most attorneys recognize that. I think that most people in the system recognize that the judiciary is basically nonpartisan and should be. David himself says that races should be nonpartisan.
But nonetheless, let's say that you're a political consultant, so now you're in business. So if somebody is a Republican and they want to hire you, you're going to do the job, aren't you?
I'm going to.
I mean,
I have lots of opportunities to take clients who are running for office.
Yeah.
And so I get to pick and choose. I'm not dependent on that for my total income. And so I pick and choose who I want to work with, and I work with people who I agree with philosophically. And for example, David Stith is probably one of the most progressive judges I've known in terms of efficiency and how the court's moving. He's the one that's championed the online juror selection, in spite of some judges who would prefer to have all the jurors there on Monday morning so they can lecture them prior to elections for an hour and a half. He wants to get them in and out quicker.
So judges want all these, you're asserting that judges want all these jurors sitting there so they can campaign.
Some do.
In front of them. Is that right?
Some do. Yeah, they want to know who they are, be able to see them, kind of reach out and touch them. That gives them an advantage when that person goes to the poll if they don't know the person on the other side who's run against them.
And then it's a captive audience. They got to sit there and listen to them, right?
Exactly. So that's one of the resistances. I think also he's looked at, he's got a background in mental health. He has a bachelor's in mental health and worked in the mental health system for a couple of years. He has some very progressive views about how we can save money at our county jail.
Who's his opponent?
Better treatment. Right now it's Deanne Galvan.
Okay. And she's a Democrat. And this David Torres versus Mike Pusley.
Yes.
David Torres is, I guess, the Democrat, and Mr. Pusley is a Republican, right?
Yes, that's probably the most important race in the county.
Why is that?
Well, because that is going to change the outcome of the that's going to determine the majority on a county commission. And as we saw this last time with redistricting, that can cost the county millions. It can have tremendous impact on the system, on taxpayers. Mr. Puzley is extremely partisan, doesn't like to reach across the aisle. And that can't happen on a local government level. That may be fine in Washington. Of course, we've seen what that does in Washington. It doesn't get us anywhere. But that kind of partisanship on a local level is especially damaging. And we have other Republicans that are concerned about how far Mr. Puzley goes to the right. And I think that that's going to be a very, very interesting and closely contested race.
Well, can you really go to the right in local politics? I mean, I don't know. I mean,
well,
it
I
seems
think
to me
you
can go to the right.
I think you can in terms of like redistricting, for example. They took a very partisan. The Republicans took a very partisan turn on that, and they ended up getting slapped by the Justice Department over their behavior. It was clearly out of line, and it was clearly.
How did they get slapped by the Justice Department?
Well,
behavior?
they were told that wasn't going to fly, and they had to readjust their county precinct borders because they had created precinct borders for Mr. Puzley to try to guarantee him a win by including certain Republican districts, and that was finally settled in those Republican precincts that were added specifically. They wanted to put in high turnout Republican districts and remove high turnout Democratic districts, and there was no reason, according to Justice Department standards, to alter that precinct at all.
And Chad McGill is running against Marcus Thorensen, and you're the
no. Not against Marcus. Marcus is a different candidate.
Oh, okay.
He's running for CCISD.
And what's Chad McGill running for?
Chad McGill's running for District 2 in City Council.
District 2 of City Council.
Yeah.
Against who?
We don't know yet. There's a lot of rumors. Art Granado has been kind of rumored to be talking about running. That'll be an interesting race. He's another hard right Republican.
Art Granado, didn't he used to be with the police department? Is that Art
No,
Granado?
that's not. You're thinking of somebody else's name. It's not Art.
Okay.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, there was another Granado. Okay. So why are you doing this business? What's the story?
Make money. And I get to, I get to make money, and I get to do it in a way, doing something I really enjoy doing, which is a lot of analysis, strategy. I do voter targeting, media campaigns, a lot of stuff that I did with the paper. But it pays better than the paper.
Well, we do miss. I will tell you that I do miss your newspaper, and I do miss the other independent paper that had more of a prominence before, which was Homer Villarreal's El Defensor. I do miss those two papers.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that. I mean, my public access show is one of the limited independent voices out there.
Well, we appreciate you still being here because the problem is, of course. It's very difficult if you do investigative reporting in a small market to get adequate advertising to survive.
Yeah,
that's
and obviously, I'm paying to have this show done,
right.
and I have a career. So,
right.
I have an aside here. What did you think about this? Since you're very much involved in politics, unlike myself, what did you think about the John Edwards trial? Did you follow it?
Yeah, a little bit, not closely, but I pretty much made up my mind before I went in that pretty much the way it came out, which is John Edwards was guilty of a lot of sins, but no crime.
Well, I was amazed, being obviously for many years doing criminal defense, and I don't know all I know is conceptually because I'm not going to follow this stuff. I don't get paid to do it, but I'm thinking, is somebody out to get this Edwards? Because it doesn't look like a viable case. How are they going to, and I don't know what it came down to, but my thoughts were, first of all, you got a white-collar case. White-collar crime is hard as heck to prove, number one. Number two, how are they going to trace that money, that he used that money for this mistress? It's practically impossible, as it proved to be. So I thought, what is this, some sort of a political trial? That's what I thought. I'm not a big fan of Edwards, by the way.
I am an Edwards fan, and
I'm not.
Before this, other than
I'm not saying I wouldn't vote for him, given usually the two bad choices we have. But I may have voted for him, but I wasn't a big fan.
And I had the opportunity to meet John Edwards when he was here in town. He was here in town one time for a fundraiser prior to that election. And the thing that I felt that John Edwards was the biggest threat to the system.
Well, that's possible,
there's
and that's
no doubt that he was
that's
the biggest threat.
That's what someone else had stated, and I can believe that's true, given that what I thought of as a rather bogus trial.
Absolutely. He was the only one that talked about poverty. The only candidate
Well,
in either party.
I didn't know that. That's
poverty.
good. That's good.
He talked about really some fairly revolutionary changes in this country. And,
is that right?
You know, in terms of how we look at people and treat people.
Was he the one that came up with the two Americas?
Pretty much. I mean, he really reinforced
you know.
that. I don't think he was the first one, but he sort of picked up the idea and ran with it.
Okay, so now we got a presidential election. It's going to be Obama versus Romney.
Yeah.
Same candidate?
Same old, same old.
No. Is that the same candidate?
Probably. You know.
I mean, I think that's what I think.
It's kind of. So my question is: so if Bill Clinton was the first black president, and Barack Obama is the first gay president, then if Romney's elected, what's he going to be?
First Mormon president. First Mormon president.
So, but
I think he has a secret agenda, which you can't disprove, to bring polygamy into the country.
I think it's interesting. Right now, I think that Obama is going to be reelected without too much problem. Really, I would say he's going to be 5-10 points out. I don't think it's going to be that close. Now, the only even if the economy tanks, which it's going to, I guarantee you it will between now and November. I think he'll win because I think people will not attribute it to him. It's going to be Europe and the other things that happen and the bankers there, because what's really happening in Europe was also caused by the bankers and their failure to resolve that. And so,
well, they're doing, I hate to say, I'm not qualified to say some of the things I say on the show, but they've done the same thing, these corporations, and they've
Absolutely.
got the same government plot throughout the Western world.
That's right.
I was listening to Canadian radio this morning, or yesterday morning, and I didn't know that they also gave a bailout to General Motors in Canada, for example. Did they give it in every country of the world? Every country in the world, they're saying the Western world, Greece, Italy, etc., Portugal. Oh, we're greatly in debt to someone, and we have to cut back on social welfare programs or programs for the people. We have to get rid of this. It's everywhere. It's the same thing.
Well, it's very interesting, Mark, because if you look at really what happened, and I mean, this is factual. You can go. Anybody who wants to can find out the truth. It's really easy, but it's not the propaganda here. It's not the social programs in Europe that caused their problems. Ireland was running a surplus. Spain was running a surplus. Italy was not in bad shape. Greece was not in that terrible of shape. What happened was when we bailed our bankers out, they bailed their bankers out, except they did not have the debt ratings that we had or the size of an economy to absorb that. And so what they did, their answer is that, okay, we've added all this extra debt, so we're going to take that out of the working guy in more taxes and less benefits. And we're going to say that it was him that broke the system because he was getting too much. And that's exactly what's been happening. It's no doubt about it. I think the Greeks are going to bail on the Eurozone. I think they should. I think they should declare bankruptcy. Iceland did, and Iceland is way ahead for doing so. They weren't in the Euro, but they filed bankruptcy. Well, basically as a country, what amounts to filing bankruptcy.
That was my impression, is that these countries, they should file bankruptcy
Yes.
if they are bankrupt.
Right.
We believe in free enterprise. We believe in, and I must say that I have a great amount of, even though I've heard the opposite thing about Greece, I have a great amount of respect for the Greeks taking that kind of stand, that they are not going to be deprived of what they have.
Well, the Greeks were lied to from the beginning. There was a conservative government in power that brought Greece into the to the euro. That, in order to get in there, they had to lie about their current debt situation. They concealed their debt situation, and in fact, they had Goldman Sachs help them develop debt instruments to hide how far in debt they were, so they would be accepted into the European Union to start with.
Well,
these very same banks and players, you see.
Well, the implication almost was it like blame the Greek people, like they were lied.
Yeah.
They lied to get into the European, common market or something.
Right.
But it wasn't the people, obviously. It was these governments.
Right.
Is that
exactly.
right?
I never got to make any of these choices. Were you at the corporate bank table when they decided to start selling mortgage-based securities based on people who couldn't pay? I wasn't. You know, they want to say, well, because I collect Social Security, I'm the problem. Come on, give me a break. I wasn't in Congress sitting at the commission table asking the questions of bankers and say, oh, sorry, yeah, we had to bail you out with billions of dollars, but we're not going to put anybody in jail. We're not going to hold anybody accountable. I wasn't part of that. Why should I take a cut in what I've paid into an agreement with for my whole entire life with my government so that those guys can walk? They're making great profits.
I'm not necessarily a favor of a lot of these groups, maybe even the teachers' unions or whatever. But nonetheless, when they became teachers, there was an oral agreement that they were going to have certain benefits.
Not only just an oral agreement, they had negotiated contracts.
That's right. And they went in it with the idea that we're not going to get rich, but we're going to have a well-paid, secure job the rest of our lives. So that's like a contract, right?
That's exactly.
It's the same way. Everyone, most of these people, as you're saying, you pay into Social Security disability, you're forced to pay your Social Security, you're forced to pay in it. Then they're saying, oh, well, we can't pay it.
That's right.
What is that? I don't understand. Yes. What is that? Is that some sort of, what would you say? Is that treachery? Is that, why is nobody held accountable?
Well, it breaks the social contract. That's the social contract between working people and the people who have the power and money. And if you break that, then you get the very thing they don't want, which is unrest, revolution, sabotage, poor performance, and it happens on every level, from the guy who's working at the gas station who starts slipping money in his pocket off the top, to the corporate banker. The whole social contract between people starts to break down based on corruption and the amount of money available in the system, and we see that especially right now in the election process. And I'd like to.
Why? Because nobody voting. Because nobody's voting? Is that
well, I think a lot of the voter turnout people I think what's happened is the mass media, the unlimited funds are really interesting. I want to kind of segue, if you don't mind, back to this congressional election for our district, because I think it kind of points out the money issue and how the money elects the politicians who pass the legislation that takes care of the people who provide them the money, not the people who provide them the votes. The choices are made prior to you ever getting to the election booth. Okay, we're not going to have anybody to vote for who's going to tear the system down or rearrange it to help working guy. That's not the process. And I think this little thing here points it out pretty good. Let's look at this race here, this congressional race. And I think there's some big stories here.
You're talking about the congressional district we're in right now. Mr. Farenthold, Blake Farenthold, commonly known, who took over Solomon Ortiz's position, a longtime Democrat, and Blake Farenthold beat him by a very slim margin, I understand. Blake Farenthold beat him, and now he has these Democratic opponents. I think, did Mr. Farenthold have any Republican opponents?
Yes, and the district was different then than it is now. Before, the district was, Corpus was the north end of the district. It went south to the valley and to the border. Now it goes north all the way to Bastrop, and we're at the south end of the district.
And
that's changed it to a Republican district.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's a Republican district, very much a Republican district.
Okay, so whoever is running as a Democrat, who seems like the prominent names that I heard was for a long time Rose Mesa Harrison, and then Jerry Trevino jumped in, and they're the two. They're going to have a runoff, Jerry Trevino and Rose Harrison, right? And why are you saying that? I'm looking at a chart here with net distribution, cash, etc. What is the importance of?
I think it's interesting. I think it tells you a lot about the primary. Those are the primary numbers for the candidates, the Democrat and Republican candidates, and now some of this may be holdover from the last election cycle. Like some of Blake's money, I'm sure, is a holdover from the last election cycle that he carried through in his account. But he distributed $702,000. I can't imagine he spent that all on his primary. That's probably in the whole cycle. But the net receipts, $683,000. Net distribution was probably what he spent in this cycle here for the primary is $63,000. Now, compare the $63,000 that he spent to the other Republican candidates. Well, John Grunwald spent $575. Donnell and Middlebrook spent $4,000, and Ray Chambliss spent $1, and
well, but
Blake Farenthold spent $63,000.
Obviously, though, Mr. Farenthold is the Republican incumbent. So what would be the viability of anybody unseating him anyway? That would be very
well. It's very interesting because he's first of all, he didn't have a strong Republican candidate from Corpus Christi, which is the majority of the population. So he had no strong challenger here, which would have been the only way he could have been beaten in a primary. Second of all, basically everyone, including him, is an unknown in the rest of the district for the most part. And so that's a matter of who pays for the media, who has the money to buy media, to get their name out there. As ultimately that becomes a name recognition thing. Well, he's the only name I recognize. I'm gonna vote for him. So I think that's, and he has incumbent status, which also helps him. But he spent $63,000, it looks like, on a primary. Now, interestingly enough, when it shows the debt is what candidates generally lend themselves or sign for with a bank.
Okay,
so he contributed $131,000 to his own campaign.
Okay.
Okay. Now think about the ability of a candidate to run to compete with that. Okay. So any other candidate basically is going to have to be able to loan himself that kind of money to be able to begin to compete in that race in a primary.
Okay, so they can't compete against.
Can't compete against.
And what about Jerry Trevino? It's showing a debt of $60,618.
Yeah.
So you're saying he lent that to his own campaign?
Yes, yes. And so if you look at the numbers, the amount of distribution or the net receipts, I'm sorry, there's a shift. I think there's the column on top is shifted one over. Or you're looking at the right one. I've got the one that's screwed up here.
Okay.
But the net receipts for Jerry were $87,000, and he entered the race very late, at the last minute. Rose Meza Harrison has been campaigning for a year, had $54,000.
Mm-hmm.
But Jerry lent himself $60,000. So actually, he only raised $27,000. But the ability to lend himself $60,000 and put that into media buys made him took him from an unknown to a contender.
Well, but I mean, I don't think you're saying anything anybody didn't know. There was that book, and was it, the selling of the president books.
Oh, I agree with
you.
But I think it makes it's so clear here. It's just very, here's a guy who shows up. He has no clear positions on anything. He was for abortion once week, against abortion next week.
He's a fifth-generation Texan.
Fifth-generation Texan, I guess that's
it's like, in Texas values.
Right. Whatever that is.
I mean, and Blake the same way. Right?
Yeah, exactly. All buzzwords.
All these, hope and change. I mean, I don't know how anybody can really buy these. I don't know how anybody could buy these advertising campaigns.
The whole job of a political consultant, quite frankly, if we're really honest, is that when that voter sees your candidate's name or sees his picture or whatever, they get a warm, fuzzy feeling. That's it. If you can capture that, it doesn't make any difference how, they'll win. I hate to say that, but that's a very strong truth. And so a lot of it has to do with how much money can you put in the media? How can you get your image manipulated where you want it and then out in front of the media? So that you're transmitting that warm fuzzy over and over and over again.
Well, obviously many people stated, including Noam Chomsky, on, God bless him for coming on this show, being interviewed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who stated repeatedly that obviously President Obama had a very effective advertising campaign, that it actually won various advertising awards because it was so effective. Just saying hope and change were in. He was sold as a Kennedy-like, progressive, young idealist, and people were for that. Of course,
that's not what they got.
That's not what he is. And Chomsky said that from the beginning.
So did I.
He said
that's
that
why I said I was an Edwards guy. I told you earlier.
I mean, which by the way, I might disagree with you. I think if President Obama wins, he's going to be very fortunate because I think literally Romney and Obama are very, very close in terms of their political beliefs, and I think there's some degree of discrimination to this day against Black Americans. So I think it'll come down to, well, look, Romney's white.
But Romney's got a problem. He's got a real problem. Romney challenges the Republican control of the blue-collar base that they've accumulated over the last few years in ways that no previous Republican candidate has.
He's not viable. Romney, you're saying, is not viable for the average blue-collar Republican. He's not a viable. They don't like him.
Yeah.
And partly because, what was he, a corporate looter? Isn't that what he was?
He wasn't a corporate leader. He's like Blake. He's a trust fund baby. He was born into great wealth.
They made a big deal about the fact that he ran this
Bain
business,
Capital.
and they made all this money. And so
well, and it was that, Bain Capital made money by taking companies and quote unquote stripping out inefficiencies and reselling them. A lot of what they did was they took over companies, and this is not just them. This is venture capital practice in general. They come in and they see a company that they think is undervalued. They buy out. They basically form an agreement with the management that the management's going to be able to enrich themselves if they make the sale. They create the sale. The venture capital company gets huge amounts of fees and for creating the sale. They also help load the company up with debt to pay for all of this, including the sale. So they have none of their own capital at risk when it's all said and done. And then they either break the company up or try to get rid of the union contracts or whatever it is to sell it off, because it may be worth more as parts than as a whole. But they don't really have any investment on making it better. Their investment is, how can we take this company and make money out of it, whether we destroy it or put it together, create jobs, destroy jobs. That's not part of the equation for venture capital. The equation for venture capital is, how can we make money off of this? If we leave a company that's full of debt, that's got to sell that sold a bunch of junk bonds. See, one of the things that people don't recognize about the current economy and the current economic situation, lots of corporations are sitting on huge chunks of cash. There's also lots of corporations that are sitting on huge chunks of debt that they sold in junk bonds that probably are going to be very difficult for them to ever pay off. And guys like Bain Capital came in and took the cream off the top and left the debt and walked away.
Well, see, I had thought that the correct phrase was corporate looters.
They really are, yeah.
That's what I thought he was.
Sure.
In which I don't know about. There's a lot of questionable stuff going on there morally. I think there's a lot of questionable stuff, I think, in terms of skirting the law,
Absolutely.
Though I'm no expert in any of those fields.
I think what's really amazing about this whole thing, when you look at it, is they launched that campaign. This just shows you how much control the bankers have over the purse strings and who gets elected and whatnot. Bill Clinton basically had to go out there and say, well, Bain Capital's the good people, and Romney's not a bad guy, and he did good while he was there. Now, if anybody believes that he did that without talking to Barack Obama, they're out of their mind. The Obama campaign shut that ad campaign down after a couple of days because they got criticized by
what ad
Goldman's.
campaign?
The one about Goldman. They were running this anti-Romney ad about Bain Capital.
Okay.
And they ran it for just a few days. They got a lot of criticism from bankers. The billionaires were insulted that they would be mentioned like this and talked about this way in a public in an ad by the president. Well, they withdrew it because what it means is that, hey, you can't even talk about us because we're going to take money away and we're going to make sure you don't get the money. And and Bill Clinton walks out and humbles himself and apologizes basically and says what a great guy Romney was at Bain Capital and how great Bain Capital was. Tell me the money doesn't run these people?
I see. So, let's say that. Let's look at this election, Jerry J. Trevino versus Rose Mesa Harrison. Are you involved in either one of those campaigns?
No, I haven't. I was involved in Rose Harrison's campaign early on, and I left that campaign. I think, it's interesting the campaigns. Murphy Janad never had any money, never had really a campaign. Ronnie McDonald had an interesting little campaign. He had a lot of local supporters in his church and stuff, and he's a Baptist minister and tried to run some of his campaign events like Baptist deals. And one he was told at one such political event, "This isn't church."
So are either one, so do either one of the since this is now a Republican district, then do you think Mr. Trevino or Ms. Harrison can be viable candidates against Mr. Farenthold?
No, not at all. I don't think. I think people are unrealistic if they think they can win that. Because actually, the longer you know Blake, the more you know Blake, I think the better chance you have of beating Blake. And I mean, the more the public knows him. I think that in the next election, he may, as he becomes more well known in the district, you will see other challengers.
My understanding is he's not as conservative as what some of the conservatives like. Is that right?
Well, some of the Tea Party people are real upset with him right now over several issues, including voting for the Defense Act, the National Defense Act, which allows basically now you and I and anybody else to be determined a terrorist by the president on his personal decision and withheld and have all of our constitutional rights removed.
The continual repeal of civil rights and due process by the Republicans, to me, it's shameful.
And Obama's participated fully. That's the part that bothers me. Obama's participated fully.
I know.
I read this morning that the Justice Department is challenging they're trying to circumvent the recent Supreme Court decision that said that you can't, the attachment of a GPS device to a supposed criminal's car was a violation of privacy. The Justice Department has said, well, that's only in those cases. We can still do it here.
I know. I've read that.
It's very in
trouble. And people think that these rights aren't important, but again, it could be at any point that those rights could be important for you.
Right.
And rights to privacy, etc. Talking gossip, though, I mean, I was looking at Farenthold, Mr. Blake Farenthold's, and Mr. Blake Farenthold has been invited to the show and has never come on, as was Solomon Ortiz, invited to the show and never came on. And
but you did better than either of them. You had Noam Chomsky.
Well, sure. I mean, we had on some national figures. That's great, but Mr. Farenthold said we have to be constantly vigilant in saving our government programs like the Navy Training Mission, Corpus Christi Army Depot. Some conservative there. Those aren't big government programs.
I know, I love it.
Oh, we got to cut back on all this big money. Oh, we do all these.
Except ours.
I mean, where are you going at with that? What's the Tea Party to think of? I mean, is the Tea Party more politically consistent than many of the candidates? I don't think
really.
they are.
I'm on a couple of Tea Party Facebook pages. I post on them from time to time, and when it comes to military bases, no. There are a lot of the libertarians-leaning people are saying, they agree with it. Hey, it's government waste. It's government waste. It's not needed. We don't care if it's military. A lot of those people have a little different attitude. But a lot of the Tea Party people are very much kind of see things the way Blake does. We're against it if it's for social programs. If it's for drones to bomb people, we're all for it.
Well, an interesting facts on these drones now, where Americans seem to think, as sometimes these countries think, well, we have these big advantages because we have these drones. It's my understanding now all these countries are buying drones.
Well, yeah, we're selling them to them too. I mean, that's the new wave.
I mean, I think they produce some of them in France, though.
Yeah.
I think France
it's a worldwide market.
Yeah.
The ones you're going to have to worry about are the ones that's going to be like the little helicopter the size of your hand that hovers outside your second-story window and looks in, which local police departments will probably have within 5 years.
So what's the deal on Ron Paul? Why doesn't Dr. Ron Paul, maybe the only true conservative, what's his deal? Why is he still in the race?
Well, because Ron Paul has been going along accumulating delegates, and especially in caucus states.
But not enough, apparently, because now they're saying
he's not going to be president, but he is going to have enough votes to be able to influence, to bargain for something.
Well, Dr. Ron Paul is against the wars, was for WikiLeaks,
right,
and has some pretty good liberal credentials.
He does. Unfortunately, he also has some other really weird ideas.
Does he?
I always tell people, look, the thing about Ron Paul that I do like is the things that I totally disagree with him on, he couldn't do as president. The things that I agree with him on, he could do as an executive. So I'm really not that afraid of Ron Paul. I mean, the ability to, as commander-in-chief, to limit war, he would have all the ability in the world to do that. Some of his beliefs about homosexuals and other things and how they ought to be treated are a total different thing, and he couldn't do without legislative
Well, and
power.
I get a kick out of the, there was a candidate, who was it, that was running on a social platform that they can't do anything. I can't remember who it was, but I kept thinking, what's this guy even running? He can't do anything about that stuff.
Right.
And occasionally you'll see that.
Well, you see that a lot with candidates, that they talk about things they have no control over.
You know what it was? It was the one viable candidate from Pennsylvania. I think he was from Pennsylvania, who ran. He was a
Santorum.
Santorum. He's running this campaign
yeah.
on a social, moral agenda that he has no say in whatsoever, that was passed by the Supreme Court, etc. I said, who?
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, I'll tell you this. On a lot of those social and moral agendas, I'm very conservative. And I favored the man, but it didn't make, why would I vote for somebody that had there was no way that he could implement that agenda?
Well, the other thing is, that's interesting you bring that up, because I think the presidential election is the same thing. Neither of the candidates control the outcome of the economy. To think that a president can control the economy is just as partial as that belief.
That they have been stating that recently. I don't know that I'm in total.
I think they can influence it.
But
I think they can influence it, but I don't think they can control it.
Well, I will say this. It's like I've said about Obama. I go, well, where's the platform? You got something to offer that you're going to... I mean, the man has campaigned on hope and change. I don't see the change platform,
not
do you?
At all. Do you see any change in the banking process?
I mean, I could think of...
They're writing just as much. They're starting to write as much crap and junk as they did
when you're
before.
talking about unemployment, I could think of half a dozen ideas that might help unemployment. Whether that would be to get people relocated from the Rust Belt to where, to where
North Dakota, where there's jobs.
To any place where there's jobs.
2% unemployment.
Right? I mean, there's various very practical things that could be done, but nothing. No agenda, no platform.
Well, and I think a lot of that has to do with there's a failure in courage, I think, on a part of candidates to propose what they should propose. If I was Obama, I would say, no, we do need to go into debt. If we're going to turn this country around, we need to invest it in our infrastructure. We need to do what Eisenhower did. We need to invest billions into into upgrading our highway system and light rail and high-speed rail and
there could be various intelligent things. I was amazed when, and I don't know if I mentioned
our education system, for God's sake, is just falling apart. Falling apart. Did you see California is actually looking at closing some of their universities if they don't get this vote through? Funding is so bad.
Something that's related to what we're talking about, that's not on point, but I found very interesting. About 5 months ago, Europe came out with a study. They said 25% of the people have emotional problems to such an extent in Europe that they cannot work. And we're going to have to figure out how to get them from point A to point B. When I heard that, I said, well, this is a revelatory thing, because it's the same way in the United States.
Well, so if you have 50% of the population, Mark, I mean, think about it. Everything's a bell curve: health, mental illness, IQ. There's always a group of people that society has to take care of in one way or another. That's the reality in a culture and a society. And the day we start saying, well, we're just going to throw those people away, which in general we've been
where are they at? They're on in the United States. They're in prison.
That's right.
They're on the streets.
That's right.
They're living at home with their parents.
That's right.
So I think the percentage is the same throughout the world.
Absolutely.
But it was amazing that Europe,
it increases with poverty.
Europe acknowledged this problem, but now how they're going to solve it and whether they can.
Right.
is another issue, but you're not going to solve it unless you acknowledge it exists.
Some you can't solve. You're not the guy with the
Sure.
50 IQ is always going to need assistance. He's not going to one day wake up and become employed and have a wife and 2 kids in a car and drive back.
And you know what? You know what gets me, John? Just speaking from the heart, it's off point. I have clients in my Social Security disability practice come in every day, and they have severe emotional problems. Severe. What is a percentage of those people that I ask? I said, were you sexually, physically, emotionally abused? 95% of them were.
Right.
Men and women.
That's right.
And here's the deal. I'm a lawyer. They're not making those stories up.
No.
Because a lot of times they haven't even told anybody. Right. And a lot of times there's criminal records that go back that show this abuse. And how are you going to say, oh, well, you lift yourself up by the bootstraps and this depression is all in your mind when you were physically, sexually abused as a child?
Yeah, let's ask if that same thing had happened to Mitt Romney. Do you think he'd have been heading up Bain Capital?
Right. I'm not saying that. I do agree.
I want to talk about that in a minute because I'm on the board of MHMR. And I'm also the chairman of the planning committee.
Okay, and they've been on the show, the executive director.
Yeah, Diane, and we're dealing with that. We're on a statewide basis right now, on a national basis. I was in the business of mental health and substance abuse treatment for 25 years, left it 10 years ago, because the funding and stuff just got so terrible. Everything was so bad. It just declined steadily from the 90s to the point where we're at today. There's actually some things that are going to happen from the federal level that are going to improve that situation, and some changes in Medicaid, regardless of what happens with the Obamacare and the courts. But that realization has come around because they finally admitted what we told them 20 years ago when they started taking the funding away. This is going to cost you so much more. It costs you more in education, in prisons, in social welfare, Social Security, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the projects we're looking now is co-locating mental health facilities, mental health professionals with primary care. So that, because a lot of times, the person who most uses the doctor's office, who most uses the ER room, those are people with substance abuse and mental health issues. Not just for their substance abuse and mental health issues, but also because of those issues, they don't take care of their physical health. So you have somebody who's mentally ill or an alcoholic, and they don't have a case manager, they don't have anybody providing them any help or supervision, they don't take care of their diet. They actually die on an average of 25 years sooner, and they cost us 3 times as much as the average citizen. So it does us. We are way better off investing money in mental health and substance abuse treatment and social services.
Well, the Republican argument
part
is
of the infrastructure.
The Republican argument is that stuff doesn't work, or works so incrementally that why do it?
I think,
or there's no objective factor. There's no objective analysis that indicates that those programs work.
There is. There's a lot of data out there that is objective, that says it works. We've seen some huge impacts on criminal populations in terms of recidivism and reduction of recidivism in different counties and different studies around the county. I didn't know we were going to talk about that. I brought some of the facts. I just got back from the state mental health conference. We talked about these issues a lot. We're going to be able to partner more under the new rules that are coming out with criminal justice, with hospitals, with schools, with substance abuse treatment facilities to provide these services, which should have happened a long time ago. Part of the problem is the way we address these situations is in little silos of money that can't ever cross.
Let me ask you this, since we're on the subject. You didn't know we were going to talk about it, but that's the show, and we don't have any sponsors, so we can talk about whatever we want. Okay, now you're hearing the deal about the bath salts. This horrible story, this guy got the face eaten off. It was caused by these hallucinogenic bath salts. And I've been telling people, I said, look, you got all these substances out there.
Right.
And you got maybe chemists in back rooms, I don't know, they're coming up with new substances every day, and we chase these substances around with the idea we're going to make them illegal and we're going to solve crystal meth problem, and we're going to make Sudafed illegal, and then the bath, and then the synthetic marijuana. We chase these problems around making new laws. I mean, is that an intelligent
No.
approach to the
No.
substance abuse problem?
Substance
Why
abuse-
people are doing drugs? Or
Substance
how to
abuse,
cure the
substance
problem?
abuse and addiction is a social and medical issue. It is not a criminal issue. And when we start addressing it that way as countries who do address it that way, we're going to have a lot better handle on it. We're not going to stop it, but we will reduce it, and we will reduce the impact on our culture and society. And we know that from other societies and other countries that have different types of laws. It's amazing to me, you know, when Paul Volcker, this is not a screaming liberal, you know, as part of the international UN study on drug abuse and addiction, comes out and says we need to legalize or decriminalize these drugs. It's the only solution. And the Obama administration rejects that out of hand, including even for marijuana. Just says, you know, we're not going to do that. Well, you have to ask yourself why. Why? You know, there's no medical support for their argument of criminalization. There's none.
There is some anecdotal evidence that, for example, when the LSD scares came out, LSD was reduced, or when they made Sudafed to only buy it behind the counter, that it reduced the
but what happens is
if crystal meth.
If you look at drug use and the history of drug use, and I was in that field for a long time, when a new drug hits the market, there is an immediate spike in its use, and as people out there learn about the dangers of the drug, the use drops off. We see that with every drug. Now, within that,
of course, there's some indication that there's some studies that indicate that they are, in fact, become real popular because they're popularized by the media.
Right.
Media glamorization, that they cause death, they're so dangerous.
But we do see some, you know, ups and downs with different drugs like heroin and stuff over time.
We do?
Yeah, but I mean, they go up and down, depending on how much resources and how we're approaching them and so on and so forth. But we're not going to do away with drug abuse. To think we are is ridiculous.
I mean, there's been studies that say that human beings are drug taking. You know, Homo sapiens are drug taking animals.
Why do you think little kids spin in circles till they're dizzy and fall down? It feels good. You know, humans are products of immediate satisfaction.
I mean, I wonder if there's really been an in-depth study, because I live here, right? Yeah. And my exposure to overseas, et cetera, has been very minimal.
Uh-huh.
But it seems to me that in the United States, just based upon whatever I can pull together, if there was it's a complex interrelated problems. You know, if the arts weren't maybe suppressed,
but
if kids weren't just learned maybe to think that competition or money is important. It's somehow integrated. Drug usage in these cultures, I think, is integrated within the culture for a reason.
Well, I think so. I mean, if your job is going to be putting on the same bolt on the same thing for the next 40 years and you get paid well for it, well, that's all good and fine. But when you're going to go home, you know, I guess you get a choice, you know, how you're going to resolve that issue of your lifestyle and get comfortable with that. And, you know, there's a lot of people who use, I think, especially older workers, blue-collar workers, who use marijuana just like they use beer. They use it for pain relief. You know, I see sometimes my neighbor, you know, he's just in physical pain. He comes, sits home and drinks a six-pack every night because he's in physical pain from his job. You know, there's a lot of that, I think, that goes on.
Yeah, but you know, let me say this, though, because we've talked about this on the show a bunch of times. Okay, right. I'm sorry, you go ahead.
I just want to make one more point. Drugs, illegal drugs, are not the problem. 100 people a day die from prescription drugs. That is probably 10 times the number that die of illegal drugs every day.
Well, then, but it's the same problem. It's the same problem.
So, but
when I was talking about it, I don't know what that European study, for example, which I think was kind of censored because it's kind of radical, but I don't know. I assume they were talking about prescription and non-prescription. You know, including in mental health problems, it's all integrated together.
I don't remember what the numbers are off the top of my head, Mark, but I would say that it's probably way less than 10,000 people a year that die of all illicit drugs combined in the United States.
Versus prescription drugs?
Prescription drugs is way, way higher than that. I said 100,
well, maybe that's just the
day.
Corruption of the medical establishment when they're pushing these questionable prescription drugs such as hydrocodone, etc. That may not be necessarily a function of of the fact that they're legal.
I think it's a function of the fact that they're legal and how they're promoted for use, how they're promoted for use by drug companies, how they're promoted by use by doctors. But my point is, Mark, we kill 45,000 people a year in car accidents, but we don't ban cars. You know, I mean,
well, some people. I mean, you can make an intelligent argument that maybe we should.
Oh, I agree with you. We may be able to. But my point is, why the emphasis on this problem? Why are we spending tens of billions of dollars on this problem? Well, I think there's a lot of government opportunities. For one thing, it certifies a whole range of government intrusive activities that they couldn't otherwise justify. Second of all, there's lots of economic reasons. You think the beer lobby wants, pot legalized? For God's sake, pot's probably cheaper than beer now, or any other drug. I mean.
Well, what about the argument, the right-wing argument, that if we make these drugs illegal, we need to have people stop? It's ruining their lives. It's destroying the social whatever.
Use goes down. Use goes down in almost every country that you legalize and decriminalize drugs. It's because you eliminate the "it's illegal, I got to do it" factor. That rebelliousness attitude part.
Well, that's what I think. That's one of the things. And the promotion of danger and death has been shown to promote the drugs through studies.
Absolutely.
So what is the reason, we'll return to that maybe at the end of the show, but what's the reason nobody voted here locally lately?
Well, I think there was no big presidential race. I don't think anybody got real excited about the congressional candidates. I think they were none of the congressional candidates really stood out as somebody who's going to drive people to the vote, to the polls. I mean, there was no great champion of the people out there that was going to excite people that had the wherewithal to do that. The only place that there was a really good turnout was Robstown. And they had a really good turnout in Robstown in a Democratic race in Robstown because they had a hotly contested JP race and a hotly contested constable race. But other than that, there wasn't any highly contested races. So that really, it was like people looked at the congressional candidates and said, well, it's Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And
I hate to say this in a way, but in a way, when I see low voter turnout, I think it's a good sign.
Primaries, it's not necessarily a bad sign in a primary.
Well, I'm saying something a little bit subversive. It's like people know the jig's up.
I think.
What's the use?
I think that's good.
I mean, I hate to say this, but I've never seen, I don't think, two more candidates alike, maybe than Obama and Romney. I mean, what is the deal here? And I think maybe that cynicism might be a good sign, or maybe it's a sign of the reality of what's going on.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what the November turnout is because of those very questions you're asking. We are going to get inundated by national advertising on the presidential races, the senatorial race, the congressional races. There will not be airtime available for local candidates, is my prediction. That a local candidate who can afford to buy airtime will probably be able to buy 2 commercials, play them 3 times, because it's going to be extremely
Nobody
expensive.
has intelligently discussed the number of young people whose hopes and dreams about politics were crushed by Obama.
Oh, I know.
I mean, this was a deal wherein this was sold to them as a certain sort of a progressive, liberal, enlightened candidate. And then these kids went out and voted, and then what they got, which was I mentioned on the show once, somebody referred to him as a Rockefeller Republican. I said, I don't think so. I remember Rockefeller. I don't think so.
I still believe that Bill Clinton was the best Republican president we've had in some time. Interestingly enough, I'm reading Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail in 1972 by Hunter Thompson again, which I haven't read in years. It's really nothing much has changed except for more money. Nixon versus McGovern.
Oh, well, see, that election wasn't so crushing to those who followed it because McGovern didn't win for the young people, even though he was whitewashed in the media, and it was he underwent savage attacks.
Yes, he did.
It was horrible.
It was.
But he didn't win. In Obama's case, he actually won, and people had expectations, and there was no follow through at all, except continuation of wars and bailouts for the bankers and cut back taxes for corporations. And I just didn't see I didn't even see a fair populist program coming forth.
Well, and what's interesting is that, you know, in the 72 election, you had McGovern, who at first the press they didn't even give him any coverage at first, in the first part of the election, because they didn't think he was ever going to get the nomination.
Right.
And then when he did, they trashed him, and what the press did was alienated the adult vote. He did get the youth vote.
Right.
But, which was a real question of whether they were going to turn out. And that was a question under Obama, when Obama was elected, and they did turn out.
Yes.
And they got screwed. And so you're right. Whether they've become too cynical.
And that's what happened. In the 2010 election. Yes. It's a wonder the Democrats didn't lose everything. They said, we voted for this guy. He's going to end the wars. He didn't end the wars. He didn't do anything for. It's a wonder that, you know, it wasn't a bigger rout than what it was.
No, I say that Obama's going to win, and I say that Obama's going to win because he's going to run on this platform. If I'm in charge, I'm better than the other guy. That's it. I'm not as bad as him, because if he's in charge, and you have a Republican Congress, and are able to get a Republican Senate,
that could be.
That's a disaster for this country, and that terrifies people.
What did you
Rightfully
think?
so. Even Republicans and
this is an off-the-wall comment, but it always comes up, and I don't really know Did you think the Obama health care program was an improvement over the old health care program, the national health care program that they allegedly have? Do you think it was?
Yes.
It's my impression it was a slight improvement.
It's a huge improvement.
Several people who could not get health care coverage before. And now they could get it. So
I'm one of those people, and those people are going to, if that gets thrown out, are going to lose that insurance. I'm one of the people who would like to look at that transition, but I'm not going to do it until I know that that's happened, because my insurance is just tremendously expensive because I had cancer, and so, you know, I just pay an exorbitant amount of money.
Well, we're reaching the end of our show. This has been Mr. John Kelly, whose company is Herodes.
Herodias, the campaign machine.
And it's not the historian, right?
No.
It's not the. What does that mean? Tell
Herodias?
us. Yeah, what does that mean?
Herodias means blue heron in Latin.
No other implications?
Well, there's some other things. One is one is the wife of Herod, who brought the head of John the Baptist.
Man, that doesn't sound
That's
good
perfect
to me,
for a political consultant.
Yeah, I hope you're not going to be quite that cutthroat. But I read about those guys through the years, you know. Well, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
It's been Mr. John Kelly, political consultant and analyst, and has a small company as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Maybe not small.